Before Jesus, the kind of closeness that we have available to us, to God, was never available to God's people like it is now for us. We think back and we think, what it would have been like to see Moses hold out that staff and the Red Sea part, see those Egyptian shoulders drown, the celebration of Egypt or of Israel over Egypt, and we could go on and we could look at all the things that happened, all the wondrous things, the great plagues that God struck Egypt with, the great prophets who could call it. You know, I think part of the reason we want to just live by faith is because we'd kind of like to call down fire on our enemies, like Elijah and Elijah could. Does that not ring true for anybody? We'd like to be able to bring up our lost objects from the bottom of the lake just by declaring it. So they could do great miracles. They raised the dead a few times. We'd love to be able to do those things. But listen, what we can do that they can't do is we can be with God. We can be close to God. We can be in the very throne room of God anytime we choose. And they could not. Consider the vast significance of the ripping of the temple curtain and the symbolic thing that was going on there that God had done to demonstrate for us the removal of all the barriers between us and God. That's what that curtain was. It was a barrier between the high priest and between all the people and God. Only the high priest could go in there, and he only one time per year. Any other time, no one could come into the presence of God in that way. Not like we can. The Old Testament saints did not have what we have, but oh, how they longed for it. In the Old Testament, we see. Let me just give you a few partial quotes that demonstrate their longing for what we have. They knew about it. They knew what it would be. They knew they wanted it, but for them, they knew it would be after this life is over. But for us, we have it now. Look what they said in one place. Oh, that I might live all my days to see the fair beauty of the Lord. And another, oh, that I could appear before the presence of the Lord. How I long to be satisfied with the pleasures of his house. Now listen. We call this the house of God. We're going to God's house. We tell our kids that, right? But listen, this is not God's house. This is a building. This is God's house. Look, I long to be satisfied with the pleasures of his house. Oh, I want to go to the temple. When they prayed, they faced to the east and they prayed, or they faced back from the other direction. They prayed toward Jerusalem because that was where God was. We don't have to turn any direction because where we are, that's where God is. Oh, how they long for what we have. One day in his presence is better than a lifetime elsewhere. They spent their lifetime with only a few opportunities to be in the presence of God, and we have a whole lifetime available to us from the time we're saved for that very kind of closeness with God. And maybe the best known of all, as the deer pants for the water, so my soul longs for you, O God. We think back on Moses, who was a friend of God, and God said about him, I visit with him face to face. When did he visit with him face to face? When he called Moses to the mountain. When he called Moses to the tent of meeting, when he called Moses in, he would speak to him. But Moses couldn't just say, God, I want to talk to you right now. Those great prophets, God visited them from time to time and gave them riddles and visions, and some of them a declaration verbally from time to time. The high priest could go in one time per year. Jacob and all the patriarchs had occasional visitations of God. And every week, the Bible tells us together in God's presence. Not once a year where the high priest goes in for us to the Holy of Holies to meet with God. We meet every week. As we can meet with God individually or as a family or as a group anytime we want to. But we are too. And we can do this anytime we want to as well. But God said set aside one time per week. I believe I can make a biblical case for that. And come together as a church to worship me, and I will meet with you. So we meet with him by the week, throughout the week, to prepare for this great gathering together of all those that God has called to be a part of this body to worship God. What a splendid gift we have. What they long for, what they so long for, we have been given. And yet we loiter in the world, and yet we hesitate to believe, and yet we hesitate to worship God as though he's here. And I don't know why. We take all that God has given us so much for granted.